Imagine you apply for a new role at a new company as a software developer. And during the application phase, the company promises you the stars. So we are the best company, we create the best product, we have the best teams, we use the best tools, etc. So the company convinced you, and you signed the contract. And when it comes to the first day at the new workplace, it's usually about setting up the machine. The best case you will encounter is that they will provide you a disk image. Clone disk, all the tools are up there, you need to do a little bit of configuration and you are done. This is still not the optimal case, but realistically it's the best case. The worst case you will encounter it that you will need to ask coworkers for help, and then you spend one day or 1 week sitting there on your machine together and setting up all the things you need to do. And the typical case is that you will encounter that you will refer to the company Confluence just for you to find out that the protocols that they are written there are outdated or even incomplete. So the first day, the first week is over, and in your first month, it's about trying to gaining initial understanding of the so-called architecture. And again, you were referred to the company Confluence, and just after some time, you find out that there are no API or source code comments at this place, and the documentation you were referred to is actually outdated or even completely missing. So you take the courage, you talk to your supervisor, why is the documentation as bad as it is, and the nicest answer you will get is some neutral, we don't do that here, and the not so nice answer which you will get is some kind of. So this has been the only time in your career, the first and the last time that you talked about the state of the software documentation. And now you know what you will do for the following months and years. As long as you will stay at that workplace, you will have to do reverse engineering day in and day out. When you talk to people about the state of the software documentation, while it is as it is, you usually get these 3 excuses. Number 1, we are agile. Well, agile does not mean no documentation. None of the inventors ever said that you should not do documentation or should do less documentation whenever if you work according to agile principles. It's just plain wrong. It's just a bad excuse. Excuse number 2, we have no time, or we don't have any money, which is more or less the same. Well, I could give you a separate talk about this topic. We could simply do the math, and I could show you that it definitely pays off in the middle and in the long run several times. Just think of new employees or new team members that join. And the third one is my absolute favorite. The code is the documentation. Okay, 3 more. Self-explanatory code is only self-explanatory to the person who wrote it. And even if it was perfectly self-explanatory code, it could only describe a brick, but not the house built of these bricks. In other words, software documentation cannot describe software architecture and many other aspects that is relevant for software development. If you want to learn about undeniable reasons, and you have the mouse cursor, I don't like. If you want to learn about undeniable reasons, during the last few years I wrote some articles, and here are the English translations to these German articles that were published in German Java magazines. In these introductory sections, I usually write something for the reasons, and there was an interview with me last year where I also give a lot of backgrounds regarding to software documentation. You will have the links once you have the slides. And after this shocking introduction, first of all, an official welcome from my side. You will find the links, you will find the slides at this link, but you do not need to take out your cell phone now, because I will show you this link again at the end of the presentation. What do I expect about you? So you're the target audience. I expect that all of you is somehow involved into software development. Of course, you might be developers or architects or this nowadays DevOps, cloud AI engineers. You might be product owners. You might be any kind of manager. You are very welcome here, and I'm pretty sure that you will profit from this talk. And what do I want to give you with this talk? I hope that you get an overview of modern software documentation with this talk. I want you to understand the importance of software documentation, especially today. I will say more about this in a second. And I hope that all of you have your own personal specific take-home ingredients. And 2 words about me. I'm a Java, Spring, and Python certified software developer. I work also as a technical writer. As you know, I love software documentation. I create software documentation for others and for myself. And I work as a trainer for software development topics and software documentation topics. This is me. I have my own company in Switzerland. I always thought that Switzerland is a very small and very expensive country until I came to Luxembourg. Okay, before we continue, I have some questions for you. Please raise your arm. Have you ever manually means using the mouse or some keyboard stuff, configured a system, might be a Windows server, Jenkins, AWS, any IDE, all these tools that are around there today, which took you several hours, days, or even weeks? Yes, that's what I expected. That's actually all of you, more or less. Have you ever written an extensive configuration script or build script or setup script? Let's define extensive, everything which is more than one screen page. Also, most of you, that's also what I expected. Have you ever created some kind of disk image that others could use? Use this one, everything is configured here. Here's the system as it should be. Have you ever created something like this? Might also be some virtual images or Docker images, whatever. Okay, all the some of you. Now there are some things which you haven't seen in gray before, because I didn't want to disclose it yet. Could you recreate that system you configured, or that script that you wrote, or that image that you created on a bare system? So I give you a Linux machine. You can choose the distribution, I don't care. But otherwise it's naked, and I claim, use the system, create everything from scratch, such that it looks exactly as the productive system. 2, 3, okay. I hope there were more. Okay. Now to those 3. Have you documented every steps it took you to get there? Oh, now it's more. Good, nice. Have you explained the whys behind each step? So writing down steps is a nice thing, but it's not clear if they are mandatory, if they are optional, if they are just cosmetic, or perhaps wrong. So you need to explain the whys. So I see less and less arms. Why is it even more important today? I would describe today's area, which I'm actually not so into too. I'm not into DevOps, I'm not into cloud, I'm a little bit into AI, but I keep it simple. You have a bunch of tools. I had a different graphics before, but I saw a nice presentation yesterday where they showed this, or where they told me this link, and where they showed kind of the same graphic here. So I thought this is a nice graphic, so this is the tool hell that you have today. And this is why I claim every tool relies on accurate documentation, even more than a pure Java application does. So a decade ago, we had pure Java application with just Java code, and that's it. But today we have 100 tools around it. So things become more complicated. Listen if you say or hear sentences like, it works on my machine, because this implies that there are some environmental dependencies or dependencies in general that you are not aware of, and this is very dangerous. So this is one of the most toxic sentences. If you hear this, that's a red flag, and you really should pay attention. This sentence should not be said in a company. Also, there's a lot of tribal knowledge, so if knowledge is only in the brains, I guess you agree this is definitely Not a good idea. It's also not a nice idea to have Slack discussions and use those Slack discussions in order to find out information. So if you find yourself searching through Slack conversations, you also know that this is not a nice place for documentation and meeting minutes and so on. Here, I give you an example of a setup protocol that I wrote. This is something I can disclose. It might look trivial. This is about 5% of my protocol I use for setting up my Mac operating system, including all the applications. And you see different colors. Every color has a meaning, which I do not need to explain now. You see that things become checked and unchecked. Everything is described here. And I have these 3 personal claims. First of all, I claim a setup and its documentation are only complete if I can fully reconstruct it on a bare system. So once I manage to get an application or my Mac system set up, that it works the way I want, I'm still not happy. I'm only happy and satisfied if I can do it again, starting from a bare system, according to my protocol. Every manual and automated step must have a reason. To be honest, you don't see it on the left because it's still too trivial, but as soon as things become more complex, you should write down for each step if it's optional, if it's mandatory, if it's just cosmetic, and what the reason behind it is. Because once you understand the reason, you have far more knowledge and it helps you more to detect errors and correct errors, etc. And the third one, there should not be a setup change without a corresponding documentation change. So when I write a protocol about my Mac, which is 3 years old, and in the meantime things change, and things always change, this can be for sure, it's worthless because just things started to drift apart. Okay, now people might say, well, we tried software documentation in the past 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago, and it didn't work. We had so many source code comments, but they were just a waste of time. And to be honest, yes, that might be a waste of time, and I also agree that it did not work at your place, probably. So I give you the very, very basics. Software documentation consists of several pieces. And for every piece that you write, you need to be aware of, or you need to define 2 parameters. They're independent of each other. Parameter 1 is, who do you actually want to address with this certain piece of documentation? And imagine you are a company that creates a software library that other developers can use. So the documentation you write for these external developers or end users has a different aspect than documentation you write for your own internal developers or you write for your architects, which again has a different language and focus than documentation you write for product owners and manager. You know, they have different language as software developers do. So you need to define the audience, and the second parameter, which is independent of the first one, is what level of detail do you want to document. I like to use the word altitude for it. And usually the highest altitude is describing overall software architecture, which is usually done in external documents and hopefully done using some diagrams. Somewhere in the middle, where you describe classes, interfaces, APIs, you can use the languages and tools that are appropriate for it. If you're into Java, you know what JavaDoc is, and you also know what altitude can be used to describe it. And at the lowest level, at the lowest altitude where you describe function internals, that's the place where source code comments come into play, but they only should become relevant for the reader once the reader is at this place. So source code comments should not describe architecture. Source code comments should only describe this certain piece that you currently see on the screen. If you want to learn more about this altitude thing, you don't need to copy it 100%, but this gives you a very nice idea with very good description and examples. That's the C4 model by Simon Brown. Perhaps you've heard of him, or perhaps you've heard of it. That's a very good thing to study. Okay, before we continue, I want to introduce you to 2 other fundamental concepts, and one of it is The first one is the concept of markup languages or lightweight markup languages. First of all, the definition of a markup language, it's a machine and, that's important, human-readable language for structuring and formatting text and other data. And since you're all some kind of developers, you are very sure that you know HTML and CSS, that is a markup language. And perhaps you know LaTeX, at least from university. It is also a markup language. The problem with these markup languages is, well, they work and you could read them and you could write them, but they're kind of cumbersome. So you don't want to write long documents in HTML. It's nice for some snippets, but you don't want to write a lot of it in HTML directly. Actually, I did, but I understand everyone who doesn't like it. LaTeX is the same. I've been doing LaTeX for 15 years, but I still struggle with it. It's just too much noise and too many things I need to configure all the time. Whatever. That's where lightweight markup languages come in. They were invented to provide you a simpler syntax without disturbing the writing and reading flow. And perhaps you might have heard about Markdown. That's the most popular one. There are also languages like restructured text or ASCII-Doc, or when you ever edited the Wikipedia, they use a language called MediaWiki. These are the lightweight markup languages. I will show you an example in a second. And I once created this diagram a few years ago. It's from gut feeling. It's not scientifically proven. There are no references, but I still claim that this is pretty accurate. And I claim that the more flexible a markup language is, the more complex it is. So LaTeX on the top right corner, you can do everything with LaTeX. You can even adjust the position of the I dot if you want to, but it comes with a cost. And this is just configuring. So LaTeX, you can do everything, but it just hinders you in order to get content created quickly. The other extreme on the lower left corner is Markdown. It's very simple. That's the reason why it's very popular, but it's also very limited in its functionality. I mean, very, very limited. It's about finding a good compromise. We have HTML here. I would claim that ASCII-Doc restructured text are two similar markup languages regarding their functionality. Yes, so this is where we should aim to. The second concept I want to explain before I continue is the concept of docs as code. This simply means that documentation is treated like source code. So you don't use Word, you don't use Confluence or any other text editor in order to write your documentation. You do directly where you do your programming, which means you use the same IDE to write the documentation, or IntelliJ, whatever. You check it in the same version control system, which probably is Git. So you also check it in there. You don't have separate file hubs for it. You use the same process integration, which also means documentation reviews are the same as code reviews. You have pull requests for all the stuff, or you can either check in code and documentation at the same time. And they should go through the same procedure. And you can use the same pipeline, CI/CD pipeline, which includes the software documentation. So in this pipeline, you can create the actual HTML documents, you can package them, you can export them, you can target them at different audiences. All of this can be done automatically with the pipeline that you already have at your place. We just need to adjust it, of course. This requires documentation to be in text format, which is the case if you use a lightweight markup language. You cannot use any binary format, which includes Word files. Well, theoretically, that's XML, but no one edits Word XML files. So please never check in Word files or PowerPoint files into your version control system. It goes against the idea of a version control system. You want to have diffs. You want to compare different versions. That's why you use a version control system. It's not just a file hub. And the great advantage is now you have a close proximity between source code and documentation. Because I also hear it a lot, yeah, we had documentation in the past, but it didn't work. So we had our source code here, and we had our Confluence here. And of course, you don't find anything in your Confluence. and then you change something in your source code, you add functionality, you add modules, you remove modules, you do your refactoring, whatever. But you were not aware that there was some documentation related to it. How could you know if you don't find anything there? Especially if you're a new developer, you don't even know which kind of documents exist. And that's the reason why they drift apart. So you need to have some link. At least it helps if the things are close together. If they are at least in the same IDE, or even better if you use some Java doc for a certain altitude, you just need to look a few lines up and then you see the corresponding documentation, which makes it much easier to keep in sync. Of course, you need a little bit of, I forgot the word, consequence, discipline. Of course, you need a little bit of discipline for it, but that's why you also have the code reviews, and you should not let any review go through if the documentation hasn't been updated. Now, regarding to lightweight markup languages, some years ago I compared them. When you go to the English Wikipedia, you find this table. The article is lightweight markup languages, and I once wanted to compare them. I wanted to find out what they actually are. And I had some criteria. They are described in an article. The link is here. I will show you in a second. And then I came up with this top 4. Number 4 is textile. I personally never heard of it before, but actually it fulfilled most criteria. MediaWiki, that's the language used for the global Wikipedia. And restructured text, which is very popular in the Python world. So that's the documentation language used in the Python world. And I assume that AsciiDoc is the number 1. I explained everything in this article here, and you can find the English translation of this article here at this link. Now you might perhaps see that one language is missing in my list. Markdown. Exactly. Markdown got its own slide. Yay. Markdown is by far the most popular lightweight markup language, so we don't need to discuss this, but actually that's the only advantage. It has some fundamental problems. First of all, it has no standard. It comes in different flavors, so perhaps there's some GitLab flavored Markdown or GitHub flavored Markdown, whatever, but it's not standardized. Another problem is that the functionality by itself is very limited, so you need to do, either you need to find plugins to do some stuff, or you need to write your own HTML. So if you need to write your own HTML, why do you even use a lightweight markup language if you need to fall back to HTML afterwards? You cannot do by default tables, cross-references, footnotes, embedding YouTube videos. All of this is not supported by Markdown. So I have a very strong verdict. Not only me, also other people, don't use Markdown. It's just not a strong foundation for your software documentation at your workplace. AsciiDoc is an ideal drop-in replacement, which means everything you can do in Markdown can be done as simple as in Markdown if you use AsciiDoc. It's a asterisk instead of a dash, and it's a dot instead of a hashtag symbol, but I guess that's not so difficult to change the symbols. We are all smart people here. But if you want more, now we covered 10%, but if you want to do more, if you want to have tables and cross-references and many other things, you can use it in AsciiDoc. You don't have to use it, but you can use it. So again, there's no reason to stick to Markdown just because it's easy, because for the things that you can do with Markdown, you can do it as easily in AsciiDoc. So what can you do in AsciiDoc? Of course, you can do text structuring and formatting. You can use your own custom style sheet, so you can define roles. And then it looks up the CSS and does the appropriate formatting. You can, of course, use tables, mathematical formulas. You can embed source code with automatic syntax highlighting for about 100 programming languages, so there's no language which is not supported. You can embed pictures, audio, video. You can describe diagrams in a text notation, and it creates diagrams for you. And you could also do presentations via this Reveal.js framework. But it's not. This is not an ASCII presentation. This is LaTeX. But I had the time to do so. Okay, now I want to show you just a few examples. I don't say a lot of it. This is an example document. You will have it once you download the zip file at this link I provided to you at the beginning and again at the end. On the left, you see the ASCII doc code, and on the right, you see how it looks like. So this is a section. This is importing images. This is creating hyperlinks with your own text. This is how you create lists. This is how you create tables. You could also do it in a more compact form if you want to. This is how you write formulas. Oops. This is how you write formulas. This is how you write them, and this is how they are rendered in your document. This is how you can import source code. So I have a class animal.java, which is just a 45-line class. You can import it just with this block. Tell it it's Java, and then you also got the syntax highlighting. And you can also import snippets. So you could say, yeah, I only want the lines 20 to 26. So you only get this snippet here. But you know, line numbers can change. You could also do tags. For example, I say only use the tag T, 9, and K. I love random tags, so don't worry about this wording. And you see, in the original source code, I had a begin tag and an end tag with this name. And if I tell it just include that snippet with this tag, it bloop, just includes that snippet, no matter what the line numbers are. You could also do callouts. Perhaps you might have seen this in literature. But then I need to write the text directly here, and then I can put some numbers here and then explain. So I can directly explain code snippets, which is pretty cool. And this is the diagrams as code principle. So if you use the block diag syntax, I just say A, B, C, D and A, E, F, G. And this is the diagram that gets rendered of it automatically. Or you can use planned UML syntax, and I can define class hierarchies like this, and then it automatically creates a perfectly layouted diagram. So it supports planned UML. If you've heard of planned UML, that's a very cool thing. Now you might say, well, this is very cool what he told us, but we already have Confluence in our workplace. And some words regarding Confluence. First of all, Confluence is a wiki, and wiki by principle have some drawbacks. So wikis in general, actually wiki is an acronym for where information kills itself. Or in other words, wiki is the place where documents go in order to die. So you all know probably once you put your stuff in the company wiki or Confluence, they are lost. That's a graveyard. And they have a distance to source code. I explained it to you before. Source code is here, wiki is here, and over the time, if you do not have a strong link, these things drift apart. Now Confluence in particular even makes it worse. There is something called a search function, which doesn't work. And here I added the footnote, so Atlassian is aware of this problem for many, many years, but they just don't care. It even becomes worse. My heart. So, Confluence only provides a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get. So you can only do graphic, text formatting. You can't use any kind of lightweight markup language, not even some markdown notation. You can use it at the very beginning. You can paste a markdown document, at least this is what works, but then it will be stored in its internal binary format, so it's a one-way street. Once documents are in Confluence, you do not get them out anymore. You don't get any markdown back or ASCII doc back or whatever format. It stays in its internal binary format. Now, this also got worse during the last few years. They force you to get into their cloud, and once you are into their cloud, they can adjust the licensing cost as they like, as they want to. So these are not companies I want to collaborate with. And also you have a disadvantage with access right management. So you cannot say for a single document, I want to make this public and this private. You also can do this for whole, how do you say, areas or Hmm? No, even bigger than page spaces. Space, that's the word I was looking for. Okay. Okay. Now Christian said Confluence is bad. What does he suggest instead? And actually, I cannot give you one alternative. And here I want to tell you why. Having one alternative also isn't a good idea. So I got rid of the idea that there must be one documentation solution, like Confluence alternative, whatever it's called, because I think this doesn't work. First of all, as you know, different documentation pieces have different altitudes, and you also have different UI expectations. So remember navigating through a Java doc tree. You know how it feels, you know what you expect. And it simply wouldn't make sense to export your Java doc to Confluence just for the sake of having one single documentation hub. It just doesn't make sense because it would feel different. Also, we talked about the different code distances, which also is against the principle of having one documentation hub. So today I claim one solution for all is not what you need to strive for. When I did my consulting over the last years, I also got rid of the idea having some kind of Confluence exporter. I no longer care if there is a Confluence exporter for a certain language, because I strongly discourage using Confluence even for just reading. Use the documents the way the generator generates them. Also, think about this psychological aspect. When you go home after this conference and you heard my talk and you say, yeah, we should do more documentation. If you have your document messy place, your Confluence messy place, which I guess everywhere it's a mess, and you now write more documents and you put them on top of the Confluence that you already have, it will be part of the mess. But if you now can say, okay, we have this Confluence mess, let's not deal with it anymore, let's start something new with tool XYZ. Then you have some kind of greenfield. And it might be very helpful if you could at least say, okay, let's start over here and at least keep this certain piece of documentation clean. It's like having a messy house and then say, okay, I can't clean up everything at all, but at least let's agree that the bathroom is clean. This might be a very important step from a psychological perspective. Now, there are several documentation generators. If you decide to use AsciiDoc, Antora is the number one. I will show it to you in a second. You might have come across different documentation generators, Docusaurus perhaps, Gitbook, Kugu, perhaps you might have heard about it. The problem is they are all Markdown based, so I wouldn't dive deeper into them. If you decide to use restructured text, then the tool of your choice is Sphinx. So the AsciiDoc Antora and the Sphinx restructured text connection, actually that is fixed. Now this is printed in blue, which means I want to show you an example. Here, with this unsexy URL, you have a showcase of more than 100 Antora examples. It's an ugly list of a lot of open source projects that use Antora for documentation. I picked out 5 here. Once you have the slides, you can have a look at the link and just get an impression of what nice documentation written in AsciiDoc generated via Antora can look like. I want to show you this Couchbase example in a second. And the nice thing is, since most of them are open source projects, you can also directly have a look at the corresponding files or how the documentation was written. And I want to show you this example just now without saying a lot of words. So this is the Couchbase doc, and I just hope it's large. Can you read it? I don't need to read it, just see it. And I just want to scroll through it. First of all, it looks good. Then you can have some things like different tabs. For example, how to set it up. This is the Maven notation. This is the Gradle notation. So this is some pretty cool thing. If you can say, yeah, I want to have Java or Kotlin, and you can just click on it, what language the user prefers. So you see, this looks very clean, very professional. I guess you don't manage to get something nice if you use Word or Confluence or any of these things. You could also choose versions here. If you use Antora, you can keep track of different versions. It directly reads the stuff from your Git repository, so you could also find the old version of your documentation. You get a warning that this is not the latest version, but it's also a pretty cool thing. So you also have versioned documentation. And this is the source code. I also gave you the link in blue one, and this is how the ASCII doc looks like. And you see there's very little noise. So the most thing you see is the actual content, and there's as little noise as possible compared to HTML, which is also pretty cool. So it's pretty easy to write and pretty easy to read. If you want to know more about Antora, IX is a very popular magazine in Germany. I wrote an article for them last autumn, but it's German. I'm currently planning to do an English translation. I already reserved the hyperlink for it, the short URL for it, but I will need some more weeks until I finish this or until we'll have the time to do it. Then feel free to check this link, and then you can read the whole article in English with all the visual clues that I intended and that has been ripped for this magazine, which I did not like. The English translation will be better than the German one. Okay, now you might agree, hopefully, and everything Christian said makes sense, but now we have the year 2025, and can't we use AI in order to do software documentation? One fundamental thing first. I strongly believe that software documentation must be something delivered to you, presented to you automatically. You must be provided the information, and it shouldn't be a scavenger hunt, so you don't need to search for it, you don't need to hunt for it. This one here, it must be provided to you automatically. The right one is you need to search something. If you use AI, you are in your code base at the company, you find a new class, so you copy paste the class, put it into ChatGPT and say, please explain what the class does. Perhaps this might work, but the problem is you are information hunting. So that's why I'm not a friend of AI, because it still puts the work on you to pull out the information. It should be the opposite. And also ChatGPT and co might do a good job explaining you what the code does, but actually there are many, many other aspects that should be included in documentation, but cannot be if it's created by an AI. So documentation should be about invisibles, things you do not see directly in the code. Things like, we already talked about this, device. Why did we choose this pattern and not another one? Warnings, be careful, you must not put a null pointer here because blah, blah, blah. Be careful, it only supports PNG but not JPEG. Emphasis, it is important that first you do this and this. Decisions and history, yeah, we decided to do it like this. Yeah, I know React would be better than Angular, but we decided to use Angular for this and that reason. Background and context, it's something similar. And also things like we tried different, didn't work. When I was, or every time I'm a junior at a new company, and then I read stuff and then I think, hey, why didn't you do it like this and that? So the worst thing is I try to do it differently because no one told me that they already tried, and then we waste a lot of time. And it would have helped if there just was some kind of comment that tells me, hey, we tried it the other way, which might make sense in the first place, but it didn't work for this and that reason. So this saves time. All these things cannot be described by an AI. They cannot be reverse engineered by an AI. So this is my statement for using AI for software documentation. We are good in time. Now, 2 final tips regarding organization. Perhaps you might feel afraid you don't like software documentation, or oh no, now I need to do software documentation, I don't like it. Actually, I also don't think that every developer should do it. Most companies I've seen, they have a so-called free-for-all editing philosophy, which means the boss says, yeah, we have our wiki, whatever. Everyone can do documentation, everyone should do documentation. But I've never seen it work. The problem is, if everyone can do it, no one is responsible for it. And also, not every developer, an architect can and wants to write good documentation. So I've been at places, I just pick out someone randomly, please don't get personal. I just think, I don't want you to write documentation. Please don't touch the document that I created. I know when you touch it, it will become worse than it was before. So I hope you agree, many people, or a lot of people cannot write good documentation. So it doesn't make sense to force them because it doesn't lead to better documentation. There's a kind of a law in psychology. That's what I always saw. That's why I call it a law. It's the diffusion of responsibility. The more people are responsible, the less people feel responsible. It's like when someone gets attacked on a busy street and you have hundreds of people walking by, no one will help you. But if this happens in the forest where there is one walker coming by every 15 minutes, then you can be very sure that this person will help you. Because on a busy street, everyone thinks, why should I help this guy on the street? He can also do it, she can also do it, why should I do it? You have inconsistent quality standards, that's what I also saw a lot. I have a different expectations on what to write in a documentation than others have, and the other way around. I think it's best summarized with the saying, too many cooks spoil the broth. So there shouldn't be too many people writing software documentation. That's why I strongly claim, and I know this is totally anti-agile and totally anti-2025, whatever, but the free-for-all editing didn't work. I suggest that you have a few people, 1, 2, 3 people, who want to write the documentation and who are good at it. And you could call these people, these few people, documentation manager, you could call them technical writer, or you could also call them something funny like doctator. And if you ever wondered how such a doctator might look like, I created an image for you. Yeah. Okay. And the second organizational tweak I'd like to give you is that over the time there should be some documentation guidelines. Documentation is not a rule-free zone. When I talk to companies and they have everything defined, how you do the reimbursements of your train tickets, it's perfectly defined. How you do your coding style is perfectly defined. 3 more minutes, but I got it. I'm in time. Everything is defined, but when you ask them what are the rules regarding your software documentation, the answer is usually like, well, we have Confluence and everyone can write. So there's no system at all. But documentation requires diligence. It requires consistency. And so over the time, you need some guidelines. I want to give you one example. I don't say that everything written in there is good. I just want to give you an example what over the time a guideline could look like. And this is the documentation style guide from GitLab, which I opened here, and I just want to scroll through. So it's a very long document, and it just gives you an impression things that should be defined. And so they mention localization, they work with Markdown, which I do not suggest. They tell you about language, active voice versus passive voice, how to capitalize section titles, etc., how to write URLs, what the line length is, how to deal with comments, how to do text formatting, because there's a big difference between bold and italic and it should be consistent, etc. So you see a lot of things that are defined. So please, you do not need a 100-page guideline at the beginning. All I want to say is, if you take documentation seriously, over the time, so over the months, over the years, some kind of documentation guideline should evolve. That's all I want to say. Okay, let's summarize. If you want to have software documentation marked up for excellence, you see the pun? Marked up? Okay. First of all, you need a markup language. Could be ASCII doc, could be restructured text, or on a different altitude Java doc, doesn't matter. Just don't use Markdown. I strongly discourage the use of Markdown. You need some kind of documentation system. It's clear for ASCII doc, it's clear for restructured text. I summarize the others as some kind of HTML generators. Whatever you use, please don't use Confluence. Confluence does everything against effective software documentation. All their principles are against my principles. And hopefully your principles as well. And some organizational tweaks. Think about having few but responsible people. You could call them whatever you want. And think about getting a documentation guideline over the time. That's it. Now you get the link again. Thank you very much for being here.
Do we maybe have one or two questions? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. It's not a question, it's mostly a use case. So it's about large-scale projects or companies that have everyone use documentation, but no one says how we should document. So based on your experience, what is the best approach to change this? If we have some chaotic documentation and everyone writes it the way he sees, the best approach maybe go, for example, and see what is the framework of documentation that exists. And for example, we take JATAXIS and we say, okay, they doing it like this, we should do the same. Or there is some specific approach to change this way of documentation that we use it to do. In fact, to have something in maybe long term that can fit with all you said.
I suggest that you have one person who is in charge of this at the beginning. I once consulted our company with, say, 100 employees. They had a mess in the documentation, and they also strongly suggested there's so many things you need to investigate first, and you need to collect the feedback of the people, that this is really based on one person first. This doctator or documentation manager doesn't need to write the documentation on its own, but this person should do things that you were asking for. Which language do we use? How do we set up the pipeline? How do we want to have the structure and so on? So again, the documentation manager does not necessarily have to do all the writing by him or herself, but at least all the framework stuff and all the political stuff should be managed by this single person. That's what I suggest as a start. Because you said you are a big company, right? Or at least you have a big product.
Yeah, for example, we have a lot of documentations, and some, in this case, there is a lot of type of ways of writing this documentation.
Yeah.
How we can, change this way, because there's a lot of documents, and we should take, for example, framework and say, okay, things should be specific like this.
Okay, got it, yeah.
Case, or we need to have something specific.
I stick to my opinion, give it to one single person. It will be a full-time job at the beginning, so this person will be busy 40 hours a week at the beginning.
Hi,
Hello.
Thank you for your talk. It was super interesting.
Thanks.
I was wondering what you think about RFCs and ADRs as part of the documentation. Like, do you think they can be considered? And ADRs, like
architecture and decision records.
Yes.
Yes, they are a good thing. They are a good thing. There is, at least in the German-speaking part, I don't know if you are aware of this, some frameworks. One of this is called ARC42. Have you ever heard of it? It's more popular in the German area. You can Google ARC42, RAC42, and it describes itself as being a wardrobe with different sections. And there's also one section where you can put the architecture decision records. So architecture decision records are a good thing because they explain the whys. It's just important that you know where you can find the ADRs so that they're not spread around everywhere. But if you have a nice place and the ARC42 can help you organize the things, then they are a very good thing. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.